And the man shall be as an hiding place from the wind, and covered from the tempest, as rivers of water in a dry place, the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. I read it once like this: God's man shall be as an hiding place from the wind, covered from the tempest, rivers of water refreshing a dry and thirsty land, as a great rock casting his shadow over a weary land. I don't know if that's anybody's translation or not. Somewhere I saw that, copied it down. Didn't put down where I found it. I think we can do without inventors for another 100 years and get along pretty well. I declare to you, I've got so many gadgets around me in my house that I enter my own home with a certain sense of terror every time I come home. I never have learned just what button to push and just what little knob to turn. I've never known whether I'd turn on the deep freeze or the oven. I really sometimes long to get back to the little old cabin where I was born and raised, where we didn't even have a cook stove, where Mother baked upon a cornbread on the hot coals on the hearth, and where the ham and the middling of meat hung right over the dining room table, and Mother kept the cloth there so that drip brine wouldn't hit the table, you know, and ruin it. Why, if you didn't have enough to eat, you could just look at the meat and think of what is coming later on. I don't know. The simplicity of it, well, you say the crudeness. Well, I declare to you, we're going so fast now that I'm not going at all. I'm just dodging. I think we could get along for another 100 years without another great financier, like Jay Gould, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt. You get a family like that started, and it takes all your newspaper space for the next 100 years to chronicle the scandal that goes along with the family. I think we could get along very well for another 100 years without any other of these great scholars. Now, I'm not talking about the kind of scholars that you have that are scholars, but they're not up so far that they're just between the angels, you know, and us. All we can do is just kind of get their reflection. These great scholars that know so much that you can't ever find out what they know. They don't know what they know. We're too smart anyhow. I mean that. I had 7 children. When they got through high school, they'd studied everything I'd studied when I had my A.B. degree from old Emin Henry College up here in Virginia. They came to me with questions. I didn't want to go home. They just bothered me to death. Now I've got 17 grandchildren. They don't ask me questions. They just tell me. We got enough brains to damn the world. I mean that. We got plenty of brains if we use them right. I think we could get along another 100 years without any more of these statesmen such as we got. I really do. These slick fellas. These fellas that put their ear to the ground and then decide what their convictions will be, where they're going to stand on public issues. What we need today is not men who will invent something new and give us another gadget. Not men who will make a new discovery in science or something else. Not men who will go out here and build up great colossal fortunes, even if they give 9/10 of it to the government. Not men who will become great politicians, such as when you get them in office, you never can get them out till they die. That's not what we need. What we need is some men and women in America Just solid, sound, substantial men and women. Men who can build again the American home. Men who can build back our institutions to where the world will respect us. Men who can put the public schools where it ought to be today, in the building of character and making men and women for citizenship in this nation. Men, again, whose word is as good as their bond, if you please. I heard during the war, a fellow went into a bank and said, listen, I want to borrow $200. I got to buy some stuff for the farm out here and make a crop, and I just got to have it. Well, he said, you got any collateral, anything to put up? Yes, said, I got 400 mules out in the pasture. So the banker took a mortgage on his 400 mules, leaned on them, let him have the $200, and to his astonishment, the fellow brought it back. $200, proper time, paid it in. And when he peeled off the $200, why, he had a roll of bills big as your leg, you know. Started to stick them back in his pocket. The banker said, what are you going to do with that money? I put it in my pocket. He said, why don't you put it in the bank? He said, how many mules you got? We've got to build some men again in America that you can trust. They tell us we've got to have confidence in the people that are running the government. How can you have confidence in men when they're thugs and thieves? I don't say they all are. We've got some fine men in the government. We've got too many of the other variety. And some of them that are fairly respectable fellows feel like they have to play with thugs and thieves to get into office and to stay into office. They want me to respect them. The American people are so builded as that they will not respect a man unless he's worthy of respect. We've got to build some men again in America. I think the time has come for us to preach again the gospel of the ability of God to build manhood and womanhood. The ability of God Almighty to send forth men and women who tell the truth and pay their honest debts, respect other men's women folks, and play the game of life like true men and women ought to play the game of life. Now, I'm not talking about this man-making business that some of our modernistic brethren are playing up so big these days. This thing of pulling man out, you know, having begun with the monkey or something else back yonder, maybe a fish, a cabbage head or something, and pulling him out and starting him up, you know, and pulling him along and making him to a great colossus. I'm not talking about that at all. Men are builded by the grace of the same God who first started them out. Men are builded by being transformed by His power, through His grace. Men are builded when they are born into this family of God and catch step with the Almighty and march across the pathway of life. That's what I'm talking about tonight. So don't get the wrong idea. It's God's man. It's Christ's man. I know the prophet possibly was talking here about Christ Himself as a man. Some of them tell us that. The context doesn't absolutely clear it up. But one thing I do know, that to put it just as I'm putting it, a man possessed of the Spirit of Christ, in whom Christ dwells, to whom Christ has come, with power, plenty of power, to bring him into a new life and stand him upon his feet and start him in the right direction and propel him forward with a mighty power behind him and keep him cleansed and pure and true through all the vicissitudes of his life. That kind of a man shall be a shelter in the time of any storm. That kind of a man, that the winds blow as they may, will stand on his feet That kind of a man will be refreshing, like rivers of water flowing through a dry place. The prophet pictures the man as a creature of strength. I realize that a man's a mighty feeble instrument to lean on just a man. But a man who's God's man, with God's grace in his heart, becomes a man of strength and power because God is in him, because God is with him. He can hold his head up. He can look the whole world in the face. He can stand in the face of his enemies unflinching. He can declare himself as the ambassador of God. He can say, I'm the herald of heaven. And what do you say about that? Undoubtedly, we need men with prophetic souls, with the hand of God upon them, who go forth again with prophetic voices to speak to this our day and generation, if there's to be any hope for it at all. Creatures of strength. I don't for a moment believe that Luther was a poetic mystic. I think Luther can be stood right up beside a Napoleon Bonaparte. And I think as a man, as a mighty leader of men, as a mighty general in his day, as a mighty colossus of his times, he'll compare with any man who ever stood flat-footed and led a great movement forward. He was a man, God's man. You talk about Wesley, little fella, they say almost a hunchback. I don't know where they got that, but they're recently peddling that around. They've always pictured Jesus Christ, you know, little straggling beard, little effeminate face. I don't like that. I never did. It isn't the size that makes a man. Our father never weighed over 135 pounds, and my Uncle Powdell up here in the Blue Ridge Mountains told me, he said, Bob, don't you be ashamed of your dad. He said in the days when wrestling was wrestling in this country, no man ever pinned your dad's back to the ground and kept it there. It's 135 pounds, but it was wildcat and tiger and everything else combined. It isn't the size of a man, it's the size of a man's soul. It's the size of a man's strength. It's the size of God in a man that makes a man a man. You've heard the old proverbial story, it's an old chestnut, of the 50-50 hash they served in World War II. Rabbit hash with horse meat in it, 50-50, one rabbit to one horse. Well, this has been an very unfair Bible conference, the way you mixed up this hash. Here's 3 Baptist horses to one little Methodist rabbit. But I just got to take care of the situation the best I can, you know. Now they come to me all over this campus. I don't know how somebody got this thing started, and here the boys want me to settle it. About this Calvinism and Arminianism. Man brought a book to me down here the other day. One of your students, great big book. You haven't advertised it yet. I don't know how thick it was, you know. And he was reading me some stuff out of it, pretty deadly. Now, my wife's a Calvinist, 100%. Teaches the biggest Bible class in my church. I never have turned her out yet. He believes that whatever has been was, and whatever will be will, and there's no way in the world to change it. And she thinks the whole thing is foreordained from the foundation of the world. The only reason she married me was she thought she had to. She thought it was foreordained. And of course, she's made a Calvinist out of most of my children. I tell you, boys, you beware of these women. They'll take your own children from you before it's through it. Well, she's got me to where I'm about half Calvinist. Really, I'll tell you fellas something. It's a secret, but I think that schools like this could have it. I have no... It isn't patented or copyrighted. If you'll get the truth out of Calvinism and the truth out of Arminianism and let the good Lord weld them together, you'll have the truth. Amen. And you'll never get it till you get it by that combination. The extreme of Calvinism is fatalism. The extreme of Arminianism is humanism. And one's as deadly as the other. You go off the deep end on this end, and you're off. You go off the deep end on this end, and you're off. You stand on the absolute sovereignty of God, the absolute and eternal sovereignty of God, that God knows from the beginning all that is or ever will be, and that God has a plan and He's going to work it out, and when the final score's on the board, He will have won, and the blueprint will be absolutely true to the building and the building true to the blueprint. You get that and weld it into the free moral agency of man, his ability to choose his own destiny, to go to hell if he wants to, or to go to heaven by the grace of God if he will. You put the two things together, and you've got the foundation stone of the Christian church. And they don't interfere with each other a bit in the world. And the first Baptist preacher that discovers that ought to be given a medal. And the first Methodist preacher discovered it ought to be given one too. One's just as mean as the other. You know why we fight so over this business? Why we're so touchiest? Because we're not quite sure of ourselves. If you're sure of yourself on a doctrine, brother, you're not touchiest about it a bit in the world. If you're sure of your wife, you're never touchiest about her. But you ever get to where you're not quite sure, boy, you're right on your toes. That's it. You see these fellows that every time you say something about once in grace, always in grace, or something like that, and he's ready to fight to hell and back, you know. That's a bad expression for a university campus, but then that's a good expression. And it always means that the fellow's not quite sure of his own position. Folks, listen. I wish we who believe in Jesus as Savior and Lord, who know He died on Calvary's cross for our sins, who know He rose again and lives forevermore, who knows He can save to the uttermost, who are conscious of salvation in our own hearts. I wish we could get together. Quit this little bickering, this dirty, contemptible little stuff that's going around over this country dividing us. We wouldn't have to combine with a bunch of modernists in order to have enough preachers to back up a revival meeting. We'd get together, the real Baptists and the real Methodists and the real Presbyterians and the real Lutherans and the real Pentecostals, if you please. Sure, there's a lot of them who love the Lord and preach that He can rescue men from the fires of hell and stand them on their feet and make great Christians of them and bring them home to heaven. If we'd all get together, we could be the foundation upon which God could build a mighty tidal wave of revival that might save this nation. We do need to get together. God can take an old drunk. He can take an old libertine. He can take an old gambler. He can take a man out of the ditch besotted. And He has such power that by transforming him and remaking him and bringing to bear His wonderful power upon him and within him, He can bring him to where he is an inspiration to hundreds of thousands of men who were struggling in the mire and trying to find a way out and who would be hopeless had it not been for the fact that the grace of God had saved somebody like that back there. No question about it. And I think that God takes many an ill wind that blows and turns it into a mighty force to drive a sail and bring a ship to anchor. When you repent and cry to God for mercy, He reaches down and picks up any man, however wrecked and ruined, and lifts him up and makes him fit for heaven. I'm glad that when David sinned, he turned and said, "Oh God, what have I done? What horrible thing have I done? This terrible, terrible thing. This monstrous, awful thing. Oh God! Oh God! Oh God! Have mercy! Have mercy! Have mercy!" If he had not, I stop there. Somebody else can go on if they want to, but I stop there. I don't know. I tell you frankly, boys, I don't know. If he hadn't cried for mercy, I don't know. But brother, sister, listen, don't you risk it. Don't you go out here and commit adultery depending on the psalm that David wrote and think that as a result you write a psalm. Don't you go out here and plan the murder of somebody and think that by so doing you are somehow or other coming to where you will show forth the grace of God in the world where you live. I just feel this, that all of us should warn you with all the strength of our souls against depending too much on the mercy of God, though His mercy is from everlasting to everlasting. Depend more upon His grace and power to make a man stride forth and live a life that the neighborhood will respect and that all men will take their hat off to, so that any man's wife who walks by you will be perfectly safe. And any man, whether you are jealous of something that he has or envious of some possession, can come your way without any harm ever befalling him. The grace of God, if I know what it means, Jesus Christ, if I know who He is, can save a man and make him a man. A man. A man. While he is living right here on the earth. That's what I preach to you tonight. And such a man will make his family safe. And such a man will be a great rock in the community, standing like a shelter against the storms that blow. And such a man will refresh his neighbors and make men grow taller and stronger and finer about him because he has come their way. And the man shall be, God's man shall be, Christ's man shall be a hiding place from the wind. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God's men, before Christ died, stood up and said to the king, "No, no, no. Take that from us. We will not. We're not going to do it." Blow all the musical instruments if you want to. If you had the band of Bob Jones University and had it out here blowing to us, we wouldn't get on our knees or knuckle to you. We're not going to do it. God, give us some more men in this country that can say no. No in the teeth of bishops. No in the teeth of ecclesiastical machinery. No. And yes to Christ in spite of every devil in hell. Men of strength. Oh, how we need one in the White House. We need them as leaders of the church. We need them in this great world. We need a bunch of them in the United Nations. Men who stand, built to stand. I remember when I was a boy, we had little freight trains come up the Norfolk and Western Railroad in front of that little college, little little bitty old engines, and they'd come tooting along there, hit that grade in front of the college, and wheels would go around, zip around, and zoot down, stop. They'd back up and sand the track and make another 10 feet, stop again. After a while, they'd give up and phone up to Bristol, and they had some of those big moguls, that they brought the coal up out of the coal field with, and they'd wire up there, and here'd come one of those engines backing down there and back into that train. And this engineer'd climb up into the window, of his little ninny engine, and like he was going to turn on the steam, and the old fellow up in front with a look of contempt. And there'd be a chug or two, and that old engine start out, and here'd come the little engine along after it, and the whole train along after it. Wasn't any effort at all, just moving right up the track. God give us some Methodist stewards like that, and some Baptist deacons, Presbyterian elders, some preachers in the pulpit who've got some steam in them and some power to them, because the Lord God's with them, who can back up against the weight, whatever it is, and pull up the hill and go over the grade and over the top, over the summit. A creature that refreshes. Doesn't stay too long on one point here. A creature that refreshes. Man shall be like an oasis in the desert, like rivers of water flowing through a dry country. Did you ever go out in a camp with a bunch of men and come back and weigh? You just knew you weighed 20 pounds less than when you went away, and when you looked at your wife, you was afraid she'd discover that you'd all shrunk up and that something would happen to you. Just running with that bunch of men out there. Then did you ever go out fishing with a bunch of men, come back and feel like you're 4 inches taller, and you get up on the scale just knowing that you'd weigh 50 pounds more than you did when you were away? Just association, fellas around. You students remember that. As you go around over this campus and sit on these little marble benches or whatever they are, or stone or whatever they are, and on this grass out here, some women will build you. Some women will tear you down. You marry some girls, they'll make glorious men out of you, the help of God. You marry some girls, and boy, you won't be able to find yourself with a spyglass before the thing's over with. Ah, there it is. There it is. We need some vitamin, if you please, in developing the spiritual manhood and womanhood needed in this world today. I was on a train once, and a fellow came in, sat down. I never saw such a fellow. The very minute he walked in like this, Sat down, shoulders right together. Waiter came down and says, "Bring me some bran." God have mercy, these bran-fed men. In a day when an American man ought to be able to eat and digest ham and eggs, bring me some bran. Doesn't that kill you? Yeah, you go to some theological seminaries today. You know what they're doing? They're raising a crop of men on bran. Yeah. I went to Wall Street once, and just to show my contempt for that place up there, I bought a sack of popcorn from a street vendor, and I just walked right up to those buildings, and threw my head back, took 2 fingers and 1 thumb, and just pecked down in it, fed myself popcorn all the way up. And I like popcorn. There's just one trouble with popcorn. You can eat popcorn from now till Gabriel blows his horn and never be any fatter or any stronger. Just keep eating. Nothing to it, nothing in it. Popcorn. Oh, we've got such a shallow, superficial age. So much of this make-believe all around us. This Hollywood putrid stuff. This stuff we're getting over television. Substituting for our Sunday night services in the church. I walked past a plate glass window. One day in my town of Los Angeles, there stood a beautiful woman. Lovely. She had just the slant and twist and squirm, and whatever it was, you know. As far as her face is concerned, every color from the faintest tint of the lilac to the red of my father's old barn. All that. She had a creation on her head. I mean, it was a creation. Went up and down that block 4 or 5 times. I didn't want to be conspicuous, but I was kind of on a tour of research. I never saw any man stop outside all of a sudden, drop down on one knee and say, "Oh, won't you go home and to be my wife and cook my meals and be the mother of my babies?" No. Every man that passed sort of looked the other way, except me. I saw one man carrying one of those women upstairs under his arm. He is the most disgusted-looking man I've seen since I went west. That's the truth. What's the matter with her? Beautiful. Lovely dress. Beautiful creation on her head. All the color that the drugstore and the beauty parlor affords. What's the matter with her? Nothing to her, nothing in her. She's a fraud and a fake. She's a false alarm and a beautiful little lie. Whether she's behind the plate glass window or walking down the street, beware of her. My wife and I were coming across the country in a Pullman, and a little woman of that type came walking in, except this one was breathing, and she came walking in and sat down, a little baby girl following along after her. Little girl kept crying. She kept pushing the girl aside. She finally sat down at the table, sent this waiter off to the club car to bring her some stuff to drink, the wrong kind. She sat there and the baby kept crying and saying, "Give me a sip, give me a sip, give me a sip," and crying. After a while she turned around and gave the child a sip and said, "Now get the hell out of here." And my wife turned to me and said, "Bob, wouldn't it be a good thing if that darling little child could die and go home to heaven and be with the angels rather than have to grow up with a mother like that?" That's what I'm talking about. We need enough of the grace of God in this country to turn some of these cigarette-smoking little women into mothers fit to raise children. Men and women, I believe it. Jesus Christ can save our souls from hell. He can take us home to heaven, but He can make us men and women while we're here. A creature that endures like a great rock, casting his shadow over a weary land. I lived as a boy at Cumberland Gap, where the Yankees and the rebels fought for that pass more battles than was fought anywhere else in America during the Civil War. One day the Yankees would have it. Next week the rebels would have it. And then it would change hands again. I've stood there with one foot in Tennessee and one foot in Virginia and put both hands over in Kentucky, where you're still picking up bullets and shells from that old Civil War. You can go there now and fill your pockets if you'll stay there for a few hours and hunt around through those rocks and weeds there. Hey, they spent a lot of lead there in those days. And there under an old cliff that hung right up yonder, right over it, was my little parsonage. And I lived there by myself before I married. I used to sit there late of an evening and look up at that old cliff and say, "Bob, what would happen to you if that thing had turned loose?" But there was an old Indian there that I got acquainted with, and he told me that his grandpap told him that his father said that his father had lived there, as far as he knew, ever since he was born. And the thing went back, I guess, before the Revolutionary War, before this old Indian claimed he had reliable information from perhaps before the Revolutionary War. And he told me, his grandpap said, that his pap and grandpap and all the rest back yonder had said that all the time they'd known that cliff, it never had moved. But how we need some stability today. Oh, how we need some men, once again, who have some equilibrium, who can stand up, who can square their shoulders. These are terrible hours. These are frightful days. These are horrible times. We can't do with a bunch of these little ninnies that we got run around over this country. If we're going to save this world at all, or make even a respectable attempt toward saving it, we've got to have some men who can stand in their places to the end of the day. And now, last of all, and I close, I exhort you, young people, to beware of the processes that make you smaller, that weaken you, that take the strength out of you, that cause you to wobble or swerve. Beware. I heard a story. Very simple story. I think they tell it around over the country to primary departments, and so possibly it'll fit in here tonight. It fit me. I never got over this story. Said a little skylark was sitting on a stake and rider fence one beautiful sunlit morning. His feathers had just come out to where he was a full-grown skylark. He tried his wings a few weeks before, and they did beautifully. Now he could just go around, glide, sway, without scarce a motion of his wings. He could just make any landing. He was a mighty proud little skylark. He sat on the stake and rider fence and surveyed his feathers, and down the road came a little dwarf peddler with his little wagon, jingling of his bell, and the little peddler was crying, "Earthworm! Earthworm! An earthworm for a skylark feather!" And the little skylark heard it. His mother had given him a little piece of a worm, divided a few worms up between him and his little brothers and sisters. But now there he was, full-grown skylark, on his own. He could swallow a whole worm. Never had done it, but he knew he could. He looked at his feathers. He found the feather in an inconspicuous place. He wouldn't miss it. He plucked it, had it in his little beak. Peddler came along and stopped, got out a big, fat, juicy earthworm, and gave it to the little skylark. The little skylark gave him his feather, swallowed the earthworm. Felt now that he was a big skylark, full-grown skylark. Now the skylarks had nothing on him. He'd swallowed a whole earthworm. He went on for a day or two, and the feather left his coat every morning. And about a week later, he got an inspiration. It was amazing that he hadn't thought of it before. Why, he could swallow a skylark like him. He could swallow 2 earthworms without a bit of trouble. So he plucks 2 feathers, and when the little peddler comes along and gives him 2 big, juicy earthworms, he leaves one lying down the stick and rider fence long enough for him to swallow the other one. And then he picks this one up and swallows it and throws out his chest. He was a full-grown, full-fledged skylark. He'd swallowed 2 earthworms at one time. Say, before a month was gone, a little skylark, who somehow or other looked strange, like something had happened to him. Something was missing about him. Sat on the stake and rider fence and heard the little peddler coming down the road and the little bell jingling, and in his little beak were 6 skylark feathers. 6 earthworms lay up on the stake and rider fence. One after the other, he swallowed them. But somehow or other, all 6 of them didn't make him feel that he was the man that once one earthworm made him feel. And thus it went until the snows began to fly in the air, and suddenly there was a swirl in the air above him in the heavens, and the skylarks were going south. They were leaving the country. He was there on the stake and rider fence, and he reached out his little helpless wings and tried to get a kind of run and go, and finally flopped off and down on the ground. And he made every effort in the world to get up, and he just knew if he could ever rise, he could go. But somehow or other, the lift was all out of him. There was no way for him to find his way into the blue. He couldn't get into the heavens. The snows came, rested like a blanket upon the land, and the ice covered it, and the winter was on. And finally the spring came, and a little blue bonnet lifted its face to the sun of a spring morning, and the snows melted, and there in the fence corner lay the whitened bones of a little skylark. And the skylarks came back. The old mother skylark builded her nest in the same tree and reared a second family and taught them to use their wings till they could fly. And then she took them down, the story goes, and they all sat there on the stake and rider fence and looked down at the little whitened bones. And the skylark mother said, "Children, there's what's left of your beautiful brother. Don't ever trade your feathers for earthworms. Whether it's in contact with the ecclesiastical authorities of this day, and may I say, young men, young women, so far as I can find out in history, the ecclesiastical authorities of all times have been against the great evangelistic movements of the centuries. They were in the days of Christ. They were in the days of Luther. They were in the days of Wesley. They tried to stop Moody. They tried to turn Finney out of the church. They tried to get rid of Sam Jones. They belittled Billy Sunday. And now they're running around over the country belittling every effort that's being made by these young men who are leading in the evangelistic movements of this day. Listen to me. Whether you stand face to face with men whom if you bow to and knuckle to and lick their boots and black their shoes and carry their grips, if you have to pay for it that way, I exhort you, don't sell your skylark feathers for earthworms. You don't have to have promotion. You don't have to have position. You don't have to go out here to a bigger church. You don't have to run around after some district superintendent or some bishop or some big authority in the Baptist church or Presbyterian church in order to get a job. Just keep your feathers, and God Almighty will put you in the sky. Whatever it is, wherever it is, be God's man, God's woman, and go forward in God's name, and He'll vindicate you and bring you out on top. Maybe never make you great, but make you good and true to where the angels will smile when you walk up the street and say, "There he goes." That's the boy himself. He was God's man in a mighty evil generation. And now, Lord, go with these fine young folk from the fine homes of this southern country and all over the nation. Make them strong men and women in the Lord. Give them the grace of God in their hearts. Give them sinew of soul. Put muscles upon them, not just upon their bodies, but upon their spirits. May they be indomitable men and women in the service of the King. In Jesus' holy name. Amen.